basically, what I wanted to talk about today was actually the mechanics of in vitro fertilization from a medical perspective, where we started, how we got to where we are today, and potentially where we're going to be going into the future, which is getting progressively more bizarre by the year as far as where the medicine is going. What I'd like to do is quickly review the natural conception process, and then quickly review some of the traditional means of addressing fertility issues that are acceptable within the Catholic Church, and the things that I learned as a fellow when I was a fellow at Jefferson between '83 and '85. Then review some of the basics of in vitro fertilization, then conditions which currently traditional infertility care will not address, followed by medical indications for IVF, and then some of the non-medical indications for IVF, and finally where we are going in the future. And to begin with, okay, great. Basically, with conception, what you get is, that's not working. Basically, what you get is deposit of sperm at the level of the cervix in the vaginal canal. Sperm can survive in good mid-cycle cervical mucus with no diminution in fertility potential for 48 hours. There's a slight drop-off in your cycle fecundity rate if the relations are had further than 72 hours apart, and beyond 72 hours it starts to drop off pretty significantly. The sperm is consistently being released up into through the uterine cavity up to the fallopian tubes, and what you will get is fertilization. There we go. Fertilization taking place in the far part of the fallopian tube. Here in the far part, the ancillary portion of the fallopian tube, the fertilized embryo is free in the fallopian tube for 3 days. It enters the uterine cavity, is free in the uterine cavity for 4 days, and then it implants about a week after the actual process of conception. And what I think is very interesting in terms of the realities of the people who are promoting IVF is the fact that they want to tell you that life begins with implantation, and so that first 7 days is not a live human being. And the reality, of course, is that life is a seamless garment, and you're just as much of a human being as soon as you fertilize an embryo or an egg and it starts to divide as you are when you are 98 years old and you're taking your last breath. It's just that you're in a different stage in your humanity. I think for myself, the striking thing that's hit home for me over the last 5 years is I used to be exactly 73.5 inches tall from the time I was 16. Right now, I barely scrape 72 inches at 71. So, like I say, we all are in different phases in our life. But the industry has conveniently decided to try to convince the public that life begins at the time of conception. And of course, that obviates any of the issues you have with the embryos, because you can do anything you want with them because they're not alive. They're not human, and so it's not an issue. Things that you also want to recognize that can cause issues that can lead to problems with both fertilization and pregnancy naturally, but also lead couples to considering IVF. One of the things is ectopic or tubal pregnancies. And the tragedy has been that the medical profession in and of itself has been completely heading more towards a culture of death, in that you can get an ectopic pregnancy in the fallopian tube. They are not viable. You can make laparoscopically or laparotomy, you can make an incision over the ectopic pregnancy. The baby's usually dead at that point. In the course of the last 40 years, I've had maybe 2 or 3 times when an embryo came out that actually still had fetal heart motion, but it's generally dead, but you can incise over it, shell it out, the tube will heal by itself, and the tube's functional. What started about 20 years ago is that OBGYNs are all taking the entire fallopian tube out, and their attitude is that if they get another ectopic, and the chance of another ectopic after you've had one is about 20%, that if you lose both tubes, you just go to IVF. And just from a practical perspective, the majority of couples in this country are not going to have access to IVF because of the cost and the expenses involved. But so that there's been a disregard in the medical profession as far as preserving fertility potential. Certainly individuals that are going to need to consider IVF are those that have had a hysterectomy, those who have no eggs, and those situations where you're dealing with no sperm. Again, all seemingly absolutes, but the other options are adoption is one of them, which the tragedy is most couples that you're working with. And when I work with any couple that walks in for the first visit, part of the initial history and physical, we talk about what the potential outcomes are, and I try to get them starting to think about the possibility of adoption as an outcome or as a way to build a family. And as I tell people, having had the experience personally, and I'll relate the story to you if we have time at the end, when you adopt a child, it's not that you don't love them as much as you would a child that's naturally conceived with your own gametes, but you actually love them much more because they're such an incredible gift. The gift of a human being is by far the most incredible gift you can ever receive in your life. It's just the most incredible gift at all. And it's a gift that my wife and I had the opportunity to experience, and that's, like I say, I can speak from the heart to couples and try to, from the first visit, get them oriented towards, if life doesn't work out, that we don't get what we need, that they're oriented towards adoption, because there's a million kids out there that need to be adopted. As far as IVF is concerned, I'm getting myself. As far as IVF is concerned, obviously it's conception or fertilization outside of the body, also known as assisted reproductive technologies. It's, as far as a brief history is concerned, the American experience prior to 1978 was that the University of Pennsylvania was way ahead of Steptoe and Edwards in England, who were the progenitors of baby Brown in September of 1978. And the United States government put a ban on outside of the body fertilization research in about 1973. And when baby Brown was born in September of 78, I happened to be a senior medical student rotating on the reproductive endocrine service over at the University of Pennsylvania, where there was Celso Ramon Garcia and Luigi Mastriani, and it turned out that they had been well ahead of Steptoe and Edwards, and when the federal government put a ban on it, they gave them all their research work, and that's what got them up to the point where they finally got a live birth, which was, I believe, about the 225th embryo that they transferred before they got a birth. But prior to 78, there was a ban on any outside the body fertilization. Of course, the way things work in medicine is that when somebody accomplishes something, all of a sudden any bans get dropped immediately, and it's full steam ahead on anything that you want to do. The other issues with it, since baby Brown has been concerned, when I did my fellowship between 83 and 85, it looked like IVF was only going to be an issue at university centers because you had to do laparoscopies to harvest the eggs. And when I would talk to my buddies who were doing IVF in a private setting, they were telling me that IVF was a lost leader from a financial perspective. And you say, what do I mean? They were doing IVF because they made all their money on everything they did for the couples before IVF, which also gave them an impetus to emphasize ovulation induction and microsurgery and correcting hormonal issues, and moving on to more stronger ovulation induction with pituitary hormone preparation and the like. Once IVF became an office procedure, it's become a cash cow, and so that what you see now is when a couple is referred to a infertility group that does in vitro fertilization, what you'll find is that they move them through the basic evaluation and the basic treatments as quickly as possible to get them into their IVF program. And what I will ordinarily see when I see a couple who's been into an IVF program and gone through a cycle or two and is not conceived is they'll come in with a stack of papers about that thick, and you go through them one at a time, and you find out that they had a basic hormonal evaluation. They gave them 3 cycles of Clomid, which is a tablet that enhances fertility, but in minimal doses, always with the combined intrauterine insemination. And the reason for that is because IUIs are not paid for by insurance, and they charge between $450 and $1,000 in cash for each insemination. So everybody gets inseminated every cycle, even though an intrauterine insemination really only helps you improve your pregnancy success rate if you have a problem with the sperm and the cervical mucus. And then after they've had 3 cycles of Clomid and IUI, they get a laparoscopy. They're usually in and out of the OR in about 20 minutes because they have no pathology. Then they give them 3 cycles of the injectable medications, gonadotropins, which is the hormones produced in the pituitary that stimulate the ovaries. They trigger them and their ovulations and intrauterine inseminate them every time, again, for the cash purposes. And then after 3 cycles, they turn to the couple and they say, we have bad news and good news for you. You have idiopathic infertility, meaning we don't know what's causing your problem. But the good news is we have an IVF program that has a great pregnancy rate with idiopathic infertility. And when you look through these couples' records, they wouldn't have gotten pregnant in the month of Sundays on those cycles with the gonadotropins because they were triggering all immature eggs for the convenience's sake for their IUIs, because nobody wants to come in and work on weekends to do sperm washing and intrauterine inseminations. So that has completely changed the entire nature, like I say, of infertility care for the average couple. And the biggest problem, and that's one of the things that Dr. Duane will be talking about this afternoon, is that there just aren't enough people out there who know how to do fertility evaluations, ovulation induction, do the type of surgery that you need that will save most couples from reaching the point of going into IVF. And of course, the most recent thing is Donald Trump's suggesting that his campaign promises that the government's going to sponsor IVF. The government's never going to sponsor IVF because if the government gets involved with it, the bottom's going to drop out of IVF, and you're not going to be making $600,000 a year to start. You're going to get the bottom's going to drop out, and nobody's going to want to do it. And the IVF industry is a very powerful industry politically, and they're going to fight this with any government intervention, and particularly government subsidizing it tooth and nail. I will tell you that many insurance policies, maybe half, have a feature in them where they will cover 4 cycles of IVF for a lifetime. And I will tell you that when the guys get somebody in their clinic with the IVF benefit, they can't burn through those 4 cycles fast enough to get into the point where you'll be paying $20,000 to $30,000 a cycle for your IVF. So there's a financial inducement certainly in it. As far as other things, I'm going the wrong way. Bear with me. Again, just the whole process where you intentionally give the person injectable medications to try to bring up as many eggs as possible to the point where they'll be mature. You harvest them by sucking them out with a needle. You fertilize them in a petri dish. When they reach anywhere from the 2 to blastocyst stage, you then will reimplant them in the uterus, and you'll be supporting them hormonally, and you keep your fingers crossed and hope that you get a pregnancy. What you find with most clinics is, or in general, the later you implant an embryo, the better your pregnancy success rate is. And the reason for that is because the less healthy ones all died off. The problem is most IVF clinics will not take an embryo to the 5-day blastocyst stage, but they'll want to implant them in either the 4 or the 8 cell stage. And the reason for that simply is because they have something to put back in. And as all the guys tell me, try going out and telling a couple after they paid $20,000 or $30,000 that you don't have an embryo to even one embryo to put back in. I mean, that's one of the hardest things that many of the people who do IVF have to do, and that's one reason why they would rather implant embryos that are going to be much chancier as far as a successful pregnancy is concerned, rather than put an embryo back that has that's further along for fear of not having any to put back. This is just, again, the whole process. These days, what has been done in the industry is, as we've gotten better, the IVF programs that are members of the Society of Assisted Reproductive Technology, which is a subgroup of the American Society of Reproductive Medicine, do have guidelines that they follow as far as reimplantation of embryos are concerned. And generally, if you are getting eggs from an individual who's in their 20s or early to mid-30s, initially you'll generally implant one between 35 and 40, you'll implant 2, but you won't put more in than that because of the possibility of triplets and beyond, high-order multiples. But you still have a significant number of clinics that are almost rogue clinics and don't correspond or don't work with the Society of Assisted Reproductive Technology, and they'll have no problems putting in 3, 4, or 5 embryos at times. And that's when you start to get your high order multiples, which of course gets into the whole issue of selective reduction. As far as what's included in IVF, and we've already discussed it, the gamete intrafallopian tube transfer and the zygote intrafallopian tube transfer, actually laparoscoping a person and putting either eggs and sperm or zygotes, embryos in the fallopian tubes, those days are long gone. But the selective fetal reduction continues to be a problem with high-order multiple pregnancies. And what the issue comes down to is twins get to be about 34 to 36 weeks. Triplets get to be about 31 to 32 weeks. Quads, you're talking about, you're lucky if you're hitting to 28 to 30 weeks. And beyond quads, your chances of getting that pregnancy to a point where you're going to have a live baby or babies, much less ones that are unaffected with problems with prematurity, gets very small. So that what can be done is you can selectively reduce a pregnancy or kill some of the embryos to bring them down to twins. And that's generally done by injecting potassium chloride transabdominally, just like doing an amniocentesis, and they'll generally hit if the embryos all look about the same, they'll hit the ones that are the easiest to hit by injecting that into the heart and killing them. The problem with that is if you go from, let's say, quads to twins, you don't bring the gestational age up to 36 weeks. It usually ends up somewhere halfway between the beginning number and the ending number, so that it suggests that there's an imprinting process that goes on very early in the pregnancy as far as determining when a pregnancy is going to go into labor. So that's, like I say, that's still an issue that is not well publicized these days, but still present as selective fetal reduction. And we talked a little bit about embryo adoption. As we talked about, there's literally hundreds of thousands of embryos out there that are live human beings in a state of suspended animation, which, this is like a science fiction movie from the 1960s is what you got. The problem is it's the reality, and these human beings are waiting out there in a state of suspended animation. And I don't know that anybody has a good idea what to do with them at this point in time. As far as some of the techniques are concerned, most places are doing intracytoplasmic sperm injection, which we'll show you in a second, which we're injecting the egg specifically with a single sperm, particularly if the man has a low sperm count or no swimming sperm. It's one way of getting pregnancies in an otherwise tenuous situation. Pregnancy rates can be as high as, or fertilization rates can be as high as 60 to 70%. The whole donor egg issue, we've already talked about the ethics involved in it. It totally disregards the personhood of donors, of recipients, the entire 9 yards. Again, donor eggs are being used not just for people who don't have any eggs, but people who've had multiple IVF failures, anybody who's getting into their 40s, they're promoting donor eggs. You see frequently Hollywood stars and all the starlets are having kids in their late 40s and early 50s. Well, they're all donor eggs. None of them are doing with their own eggs. We discussed a little bit, I'll go into it in a second, pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, which is basically taking one of the eggs off at the 8-cell stage and creating another identical twin, and basically you're just experimenting on another human being. And then the whole issue of surrogacy, which we discussed, another huge issue with carriers, and donor eggs, surrogates. I think that the most interesting thing, which you didn't touch base on, was my understanding is the people who use the surrogacy process the most with the donor eggs and a surrogate carrier is upper middle class male homosexuals who want a family. That's how they'll generate their family. And that's something that certainly the American Society of Reproductive Medicine is not promoting on their advertisements. As far as, like I say, male infertility, this is the process of intracytoplasmic sperm injection, where you isolate an egg, you put a sperm directly into the egg, and that will give you pregnancies in men with very low sperm counts or with sperm counts that none of the sperm are swimming. You do have about a 5% congenital birth defect rate, and it's generally the male offspring will carry the same infertility issues that the father did that originally was the reason for requiring the procedure. Real quickly, as far as pre-implantation genetic diagnosis is concerned, the bottom picture shows an 8-cell embryo, and you can see that the pipette on the left is creating a little suction on the blastus, or on the embryo, to hold it steady. And on the right, you have a pipette that is actually sucked out one of the eggs into the pipette. Again, when you take an egg off of an embryo, you've just created another whole human being, and left to grow on their own, they will reach the point of full maturation and delivery. But what you're doing then is you're taking that individual, you are going to test them, as we're talking about, and today, at this point in time, there's no means to correct any genetic abnormalities, but what you do is you just discard the affected embryos for whatever they might be testing for. And the testing has has changed over the years from being testing just specific disease processes to whole slews of disease processes that you can screen for. And of course, when you're doing the genetic manipulation with your population like that, you're opening the gate wide open for other issues in the population. You can see in this particular picture, you can see that there's been a balanced translocation where some chromosomal material broke off the 11th chromosome and reattached to the 5th chromosome there. And of course, this would be an embryo that would be discarded in that situation, would not be put back. As far as other issues are concerned, again, you're with pre-implantation genetic testing, you're avoiding passing on defective genes, but you're not repairing any of the genes. It just selects embryos that don't carry the mutations. And what you'll find with that is that, again, all you're doing is basically, you're in the culture of death, you're just murdering the imperfect embryos. And again, people will discard embryos for some of the slightest reasons. It can be color blindness, it can be anything, that they will not bring those children to life. As far as embryos and egg freezing is concerned, traditionally we've only been able to freeze embryos, and a lot of programs are freezing embryos on the stimulation cycles where they are harvesting the eggs and fertilizing them, and then re-implanting them on subsequent cycles when there's less of a huge hormonal swings as far as the recipient, the potential mother is concerned. What's happening is, though, as we already discussed, is the biggest issue is what you do with the embryos that are left over, because those are all human beings and they're all in a state of suspended animation. I can tell you that in England, where they have a socialized medicine system, they addressed the issue in 1995, where they passed a law where they just thought out any embryo that was more than 5 years old and let it die. They also at that point passed a law because England has a socialized medicine system, and they were getting so many triplets and quads and quints out of their IVF program that they were breaking the bank in terms of taking care of the premature infants that were being born. So they passed a law that the most embryos that you were permitted to transfer was 2. And since that time, the guys in England tell you that anytime that they get a conception that's 3 or 4, the federal government's in there in a heartbeat to check it out to make sure that nobody put back more than 2. And what happened is if you can put back 2, and it's not infrequent that you'll get an embryo that'll split and you'll get an identical twin out of it. But that's how England is going about dealing with this issue as far as multiple high-order multiple embryos are concerned. As far as freezing eggs are concerned, for the longest time you could not freeze an egg, and you could only freeze an embryo because the freezing and thawing process disrupted the microarchitecture in the cytoplasm of the egg, and you wouldn't get any pregnancies. But that has changed over the last little bit in that you can now freeze eggs and get pregnancies, but the pregnancy rates are low. But what that's done is it's changed the approach of many working women and career women and couples in our society, in that the women are banking their eggs when they're in their 20s and 30s, and then coming back and trying to use them to affect conceptions when they're in their 40s and 50s. As far as the expenses are concerned, as you can see, it's about $12,000 to $20,000 a cycle to freeze the eggs, harvest and freeze them. And when you're talking about this, you're talking about not in terms of pregnancies per egg, but you're instead talking about a series of parameters where it's a chance of conception based on age, such that you're talking in terms of roughly trying to harvest 20 eggs, which is a lot of eggs to get out. If the person's under 35, you have a chance of at least one live birth of up to 70 to 90%. If the person's 40 when you harvest your eggs, it's down to 60%. But what you don't realize is that as you get older, the chances of getting 20 eggs it diminishes dramatically, because the ovarian reserve as a woman grows older starts to diminish dramatically. As far as some of the other future trends are concerned, the whole issue of genetic engineering is still in the preliminary stages, where they're trying to splice genes in and out with CRISPR technology, which is a type of gene technology. We'll talk about cloning it for a few seconds, and what really scares me is what is on the, as I see on the horizon, is generating human beings from skin fibroblast cells. As far as genetic engineering is concerned, currently you can take and put if you have a defective gene, you can introduce a normal gene, and there's a particular called the Lion hypothesis, a reality that if you have a defective gene where there's two copies, generally the vast majority of the cells will activate the good copy of the gene and not the defective copy. But again, this is something that is really not applicable yet at this point in time. Where are you with that? As far as cloning is concerned, really not viable. Again, with ordinarily you have a sperm which has a haploid number of chromosomes, and an egg which has the other haploid number, and when they combine you have a diploid number. In humans, that's 23 chromosome gametes turns into a 46 chromosome gene, and what you will get is normal fertilization. With cloning, what you're doing is you are taking an egg, you're removing the nucleus, which has if it was human, it would be 23 chromosomes, and then you take a full nucleus with the total of 46 chromosomes and introduce them into the neutered egg and stimulate it to start contracting, and you can get a cloned individual. Of course, the famous one on that was Dolly the sheep. Problems with cloning is, though, that the human DNA will only cleave so many times. And what you find is with humans, our life expectancy is limited to about 110 years, because at that point in time, the chromosomes won't continue to divide. So that you get an individual whose life expectancy reflects that of how many divisions were left in the genetic material at the time. Basically, there's limitations to this. It's illegal to do currently in humans, has a very low yield, even in animals, of only a 1% to 2% success rate, and it's being limited at this point to trying to clone like prize bulls for future breeding purposes, and so it doesn't really have a whole lot of future at this point in time. What I think is a bigger problem, though, right now is there's technology to develop gametes or sperm and eggs from skin cells or from fibroblasts in the skin. And the problem with that is that you harvest the fibroblasts, you de-differentiate them into stem cells, then they get redifferentiated into sperm and eggs, and you can fertilize them. They do require some chemical influences, sperm from the other tissues in the testicle, eggs from the granulosa cells in the ovary, but they can become functional sperm and eggs, so that you're basically creating sperm and eggs for reproduction. This is a technology which has already been done in mice, where by 2014 they de-differentiated skin cells from mice into sperm and eggs. They fertilized them, they implanted them in a mouse to gestate it, and they had a litter of pups from the sperm and eggs that were developed from skin cells. In human beings, they've taken them to the blastocyst stage. The problem is we don't have the chemicals down yet that in the human, so that they had to use the chemical environment from the mouse cells in order to get the humans to the blastocyst stage. But that's something that's on the future, and what I personally think is going to be just one of the major problems that we're going to be having over the course of the next 20 years or so. And finally, as far as implications for this are concerned, with this technology, and while it won't happen in my lifetime, it'll probably happen in the lifetimes of the younger people in this audience. There's going to be complete asexual reproduction at one point or another, with complete extracorporeal or outside of the body gestation of human beings. And again, this will probably occur during the lifespan of some of the lifetimes of some of the younger people in this audience. So that, to summarize things, as far as I see it, at least, the biggest issues from a medical perspective are concerned, first off, is the hundreds of thousands of embryos that are out there, little human beings in a state of suspended animation, that really something needs to be done with for them more than just thaw them out. Egg freezing is changing the social landscape of dating and family, because, again, there's a further disconnect between marriage and the family is the basis for our societal structure, and it's becoming progressively more divorced, so that people are looking to actually not pursue family and the basics of our family system in their younger years, but are going to wait to reproduce of their own accord, if need be, after their careers have taken off and they're in their 40s or 50s. So that's something that's definitely on the horizon. Genetic engineering is coming, there's no question about that. And again, sooner or later we're going to be seeing complete asexual reproduction. And that said, just some final thoughts real quick. Which is basically the theme of this conference, and why it's so important that somebody be talking about this, and somebody be talking about this in this framework, which is the Catholic Church, which is, as a physician, it's embarrassing to have to say that this medical community has completely lost its way and is totally our And it's really, the Catholic Church, it's just another example of the immediate relevancy of our faith in our everyday lives, but also in the lives of our society when you get right down to it. But there's going to need to be situations that you'd never ordinarily consider. And I remember years ago when I was considering getting involved in IVF, when it was an office procedure, I had brought a friend of mine in, Sam Jacobs, who'd done IVF when he was at the University of Connecticut. We had two offices. Sam was going to do the IVF in the adjacent office. I wasn't going to be involved with it at all. And Sam was all set to go. This was back in 1999. And something was just bothering me. And there was a counselor I was speaking to, and he says, "Why don't you give Bishop McHugh, who was the bishop of the Diocese of Camden at the time. He says, why don't you give him a call, because he's a guy who's very much oriented into science and medicine. And so call the guy up down in his office. He says to me, why don't you come over to the house for dinner one night? And go over to his house. Much to my surprise, it was just him and me. We sit down, we have drinks beforehand, and we have quite a discussion. And what impressed me was two things about the guy. One was he had a subscription to the New England Journal of Medicine, and he read it, which for the bishop of a diocese, that was very impressive. And we had a long discussion, and it basically came down to the fact that he said, even if you can separate things out at this point in time so that your buddy Sam does the IVF and you really don't do anything, he said there's going to be a time when the technology is going to change to the point where you're going to end up on a slippery slope and you're going to end up finding yourself engulfed in it. And it was at that point that I realized that was not a path that was going to be an option for me. And went in the next morning and told Sam that he was going to have to find another job because I couldn't afford to pay him $180,000 plus $40,000 in benefits for doing nothing. And fortunately, the great thing was it was a handshake deal we had, so there were no lawyers involved, and it worked out very well. But in any case, so that's my take on it as a physician. This is an evolving topic. It's something that, again, would I have gone into reproductive endocrinology when I was, after I finished my residency in OBGYN in 1983, if I knew it was going to reach this point? No. I probably would have gone into gynecologic oncology, where I would have had the opportunity to do all the surgery and all, but just completely avoided the moral issues. But the moral issues, when you're in it, you can't avoid it. And the reality is, and this is one of the things that Dr. Duane will speak to you guys about this afternoon, there's a lot of very, very good ways to treat infertility in patients that are totally within the realm of moral acceptability in the Catholic Church. The problem is that's not where the money is right now. And most people that have fertility clinics, they're chasing the buck, and they're going to whip a person through any of the more practical means of correcting fertility issues as fast as they can to get them into the $20,000 to $30,000 a cycle cash and carry land of IVF. So on that note, I thank you for your time, and everybody, I hope you have a good lunch. And I hope I didn't go over.